You already mentioned the maintenance problems as one of the often overlooked issues in automation and testing. Usually the management or the people who do not understand the automation, the complete automation scenario, thinks that, well, we will just use the automation as a way to reduce costs of testing. This is a very clear symptom of poor understanding of testing and test automation. We have to understand that all automation brings maintenance costs with it. It is very difficult and we cannot calculate those costs because it depends on way too many things. Are we going to change often the application? What are going to be the changes? Are we going to, how are we going to design our automation will depend also the maintenance costs. So from the first day we have to think about the maintenance problems. The good automation will try to reduce these costs by looking carefully in its design. The poor automation can bring up the maintenance problems quite quickly and can sink the whole project. While we speak about maintenance, the idea of use and throw away checks or scripts comes to mind. Sometimes, on occasions, we will automate certain scripts, we will automate certain checks that will be just to use and never reuse them again. We don't have to be afraid of this because, oh no, we have to maintain them. No, maybe we don't have to maintain them. Maybe we will just use them for data generation. Maybe we will use them just 1 or 2 or 3 times for a very specific and critical functionality that is very difficult to test for humans. Sometimes we will use them just for 1 or 2 sprints. And after that, there will be no more need because maybe the functionality is not present anymore, or maybe it is trained and nobody is touching that functionality, so we don't need them for the regression. Automation just as testing responds to specific information objective. Once the information objective is achieved, maybe we don't need those scripts. Don't be afraid of using and throwing away scripts. Sometimes, in certain situations and contexts, these scripts, this automation has great value, and after that it has little to no value at all. You're quite safe to just throw it away or put it somewhere where nobody can find it, or where you can find it if you need it later. We spoke about the regression checks. When you speak of regression, that is, like Kem Kainer said, quite a fancy term for something that is called actually retesting. Usually we speak of testing the same functionality looking for unintended bugs caused by changes in the code. Like Elizabeth Hendrickson said in the definition of exploratory testing, that changes happen too fast. They just happen so fast that it's quite easy to put an unintended bug in the functionality. So usually, and maybe in 80 to 90% of the cases, when the companies want to do some checks automation, they think about the regression checks, not about anything else. So this means that when you ask them, so what are you going to automate, what you want to automate, usually the answer will be regression. We want to be sure, we want to be peaceful, we want to know what's happening with the application. So the checks design becomes quite important. How about the trust? Can you trust them? If you're going to use them for something quite important, such as a regression, then wow, you need to trust them. Are we going to be able to execute them easily against different environments? Because you would like to accompany the testing from the testing to pre-production to production or whatever environment there is. Can you execute them as many times as needed without altering the expected result? That's another important question that should be asked when talking about the regression. Are we going to easily modify or add new checks? Because usually the regression suites tend to grow. As long as we are developing new user stories or new functionalities in our system under test, well, the regression checks are going to grow. So there's a few tricks. There is one quite interesting heuristics we will talk about in the further courses that is called RC test heuristics, and that actually talks about what we have to take a look at when we are talking about the regression. Another important factor is the time factor when we are talking about the automation, and especially automation and regression, because we want to have the results quite quickly. Time required to implement, maintain, execute, and analyze the results of automated checks is time we steal from testing effort. It's not only the time we need to execute the checks or analyze the checks. No, we have to think about the implementation and the maintenance to sum up the whole time required for the automation. The execution analysis has the same weight as the implementation and the maintenance. The automation execution should be fast. We cannot wait more than few minutes, or maybe 20 up to 30 minutes could be more or less acceptable in certain environments. So therefore you have to be quite careful when designing your automation. If you're going to automate checks just because you can, you will end up with lots of useless automated checks that just add up to an overall time needed to execute the automation. So pick carefully which checks you automate. Measure your times. Decide, are you going to parallelize or not? How much time is enough? In some companies, 3 minutes is the limit of the time developers are ready to wait because they implement a continuous delivery. In some other companies, people can wait for the nightly builds and nightly execution of the checks, and the people will take a look at the early morning which checks went fine and which didn't go fine. I was in a team in which we tried to implement a continuous delivery, and we did have 3 stable builds per day. Our execution took around 40 minutes, the full regression took around 40 minutes, but it was acceptable, but it was run on more than 5 machines simultaneously. We have to have this consideration in mind when we are talking about the time factor in the execution of the automated checks. Results analysis is another part. If we try to design our automation to have some stable and rich results, then the results analysis will take less time. Especially if we can trust our checks, if they're stable and robust and don't fail unless there is actually an important failure in the system. We can even automate the results analysis. We can parse the logs and look for the errors and just focus on those that are quite important. You see, it's not only automated checks. The automation in testing can be applied even on the results analysis.